In the last few days, we have gotten some Kings news about guys that the Kings have been working out to fill out the last roster spot at the end of the bench. Possibly guys that the Kings could bring into training camp to see if they could fit in the team. So now is a great time to go over our second to last player preview episode, where we look at all the guys at the very end of the bench, the two-way guys, the guys that are on training camp deals or that have worked out for the Kings who could possibly just fill out the end of that bench. And then the last episode of the player previews will be about Devin Carter, who I've saved till last just because he's injured and so he won't make an impact at the start of the season. Right now, if I have this correctly, the Kings have 17 out of 18 roster spots filled. They have all three of their two-way spots filled, and so they have just one regular roster spot remaining. And so the guys that could compete for that last spot are any of the two ways could get promoted to that spot. Boogie Ellis, Terry Taylor are both on training camp invite deals. And then we've heard of three guys that have been working out for the Kings. And so those three guys are Jay Crowder, TJ Warren, and Nassir Little. So everyone's kind of competing for one spot. And I think based on the guys that are working out for the Kings, it seems pretty obvious that the Kings want to fill that spot with a veteran wing player that can defend. Before we get into talking individually about these guys that are at the end of the Kings roster, remember, if you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. As always, thank you to Cody Willis and Joe Mama for supporting the channel and being members. And if you really want to support the channel, you too can become a member, get early access to videos like this, among a few other perks. So now we can get into talking about these guys. I think the first guys to talk about are the guys that are working out for the Kings that don't have any deals with the Kings. So the first guy that we heard about was Jay Crowder. Sean Cunningham reported that, and then Sam Amick reported that TJ Warren and Nassir Little were working out for the Kings. All guys that have experience in the league, Nassir Little being the younger guy who hasn't been as proven in the league, hasn't had as much success as the other two guys, but is younger and maybe has more potential than those guys. Nassir Little hasn't really proven himself as the same type of consistent shooter as those other two guys. Jay Crowder, definitely the best defender out of these guys, but is very much out of his prime. TJ Warren, the best offensive player out of these three players. And then Nassir Little, like I said, is kind of the upside guy. So you have the defense, you have the offense, you have the upside. I wouldn't necessarily be mad if any of these guys made the roster, because really what it's going to be is just a filler. And it's funny, I just as I'm recording this, I get a notification that the Kings have officially signed Boogie Ellis. So that's a player that we will be going over in a second. But I think the guy that I would most want out of those three guys is probably Jay Crowder, even though he's older, he's not what he used to be. I think just as a one-season filler, a guy who can defend and has experience and is more of a proven player. Sure, we could go with a guy like Nassir Little and go for the upside play, but I don't really think that's what we should be doing this season. I think if you want to invest in a young guy, then you invest in a guy like Isaiah Crawford, not Nassir Little. And then I wouldn't be mad at TJ Warren either, just because you can always use a guy like that can go get some buckets. Sure, veteran at the end of the bench, but I do think out of those three guys, Jay Crowder would be my pick. But we can also look at the guys that the Kings actually have signed right now. And so let's go through our three two-way players and then Boogie Ellis and Terry Taylor, who are on training camp contracts that could go into this next season. I think Terry Taylor is also a guy that you could kind of lump in to the three guys that we've worked out so far, just because he's also a guy that has some experience and is, a little older, although definitely not super old. He's like 24, 25, but he's shown that he can dominate in the G League. And so he's another guy that could just be like a body out there defensively, super athletic, when I'm looking at filling this last roster spot, I'm thinking about all the things that the Kings struggled with last season. And what the Kings struggled with was guarding a guy like Zion or guarding a guy like Giannis. And, there's not that many guys to that extent, that many, bigs that are as strong and freakishly athletic as Zion and Giannis, right? And so it's not the end of the world if you don't have someone that can perfectly match those guys, unless you play the Pelicans 6 times in a season and lose all 6 of those. That's probably not going to, happen again. But still, a guy like Terry Taylor or a guy like even Jay Crowder would be better than the guys that we had on a guy like Zion last season, which was just Harrison Barnes, right? So Taylor, he can rebound. He can add that physicality, which is always nice. A guy that can rebound and brings physicality, even though rebounding wasn't necessarily a struggle for the Kings last season. But at the same time, I don't think we should really, just sacrifice the offense. And not that signing a guy at the end of the bench who can't necessarily shoot the 3 super consistently is going to sacrifice the offense, but just him being out there at any given point when you're playing him with another non-shooter like a Sabonis or a Len, that's not necessarily something we want to do. And so it's like, how does he fit into any potential Kings rotation as like a wing or a forward? For me, I would rather invest into a guy like Isaiah Crawford, who obviously we already have signed to a 2-way. So it's not like he's going to take up that last roster spot. But I think for Isaiah Crawford, he has the highest ceiling of any of the Kings prospects outside of a Devin Carter, who was obviously a first-round pick. But when you're talking about the 2-ways or the training camp invites, those types of prospects, I think Isaiah Crawford has the highest ceiling because I think he's a wing that can fit into the Kings rotation. He's 6'6", he's strong, he's 23 years old. He's going to be 24, I think, in November. And so obviously that's a little older, but I think what we saw in Summer League was he showed the ability to be a great 3-and-D player who can thrive on low usage. He came off the bench in a lot of those games in Summer League, and he wouldn't get the ball at all. Nobody was finding him. And then finally he would get his shot, as a 3-point shooter, and he would knock it down, and he'd be making plays defensively. I think he has good defensive instincts. And so those are all things that are very important as a role player to be able to make positive plays when you're not really getting the ball a lot. And I think that's kind of the difference between him and some of those other guys in Summer League that you see where they have the ball in their hands all the time, like a Mason Jones or a Colby Jones. Those were the guys that had the ball in their hands a lot. Or even when you look at a guy like Terry Taylor in the G League, where he's a dominant G League player, but like, how is he going to play when that's not when his role is not to score 20 plus points per game? And so that's, I think, what makes me the most excited about Isaiah Crawford and why I think the Kings should invest the most into developing him and maybe giving him minutes at some point this coming season. I do think that still leaves a bit of a gap in the Kings roster at the 4 position, like a really big, strong 4 that maybe Terry Taylor could fill or Jay Crowder could fill, because Isaiah Crawford isn't, he's not going to play the 4, he's going to play more the 3. And really the Kings have holes at both positions, both in terms of wing defense at like the 2 and the 3, but then also a bigger defender at the 4. So I think Isaiah Crawford can be the guy that's more of a perimeter defender. I mean, I think he has strength, but I think then with that last roster spot, they should find someone that has the ability to guard up and guard 4s and maybe even 5s. And maybe that's what they're looking for in Isaac Jones, who's also on a 2-way contract, because he's like a 6'9", just athlete. He can play the small ball center. He can maybe play the 4. He definitely has the physical tools and the athleticism. I think his shooting stroke actually looks pretty smooth, and he showed the ability to attack the rim and be able to like change directions around the rim. But the worry is, at his age, a little older, will that 3-point shot develop? Because it looked smooth, but it didn't go down super consistently in Summer League. He didn't shoot it a lot in college. But then also, he's a guy that you want to put out there for his defense, because Like I said, that's the hole in the Kings roster, defensively at the 4-5 position. And I think in Summer League, just his processing was a little bit slow on the defensive end. It felt like there were so many times where with his physical tools, he should have been in a position to make a play, or it looked like he could have gotten over and gotten the block, or gotten over and contested a shot, or gotten in front of someone, and he was just a little slow to get there. Not because he's physically slow, but just because he didn't recognize the play soon enough. I think physically, he's the type of guy that you would want guarding like a Zion or a Giannis, those types of athletes. But I don't think that he's going to be the guy that fills that role for the Kings, just because I don't think that 3-point shot is there, and I don't think he's there defensively with his like defensive IQ, I guess. So those are kind of all the guys that are the wings or the bigs. But then we have the guards. Mason Jones. I think Mason Jones is a great like veteran emergency player. He's been around for a bit now, and I think he has a really solid all-around game. He can shoot the three, over 40% three-point shooter. He can shoot from very deep. He's not afraid of the moment. Made big shots in G League playoff games last season. And he's a bigger guard. He's very strong. That could possibly fill in on the wing. But he's already 26, and I think at this point he probably won't develop anymore to become like a rotational player. Although we did see how he transformed his body this summer, and so obviously there's still development being done there. But for me, I just think as a two-way player, he's just like a great emergency player to have in case of injury, rather than a guy that going forward is really going to develop into a rotational player. And I think that's kind of the same with Isaac Jones, not from a veteran standpoint like Mason Jones is and experience, but just from a standpoint of I don't think Isaac Jones is really going to develop into a rotational player going forward. And so he's just kind of that emergency player in case we need somebody at his position to be able to go out there and give some minutes and run around and be an athlete. And honestly, probably the same with Terry Taylor. And that's why I'm so high on Isaiah Crawford, because I don't think he's like that. I think Isaiah Crawford is the one guy, definitely out of the two ways or the young guys that we're bringing into camp or working out, that could actually develop into a rotational player. But then the last guy to talk about is Boogie Ellis. And I love Boogie Ellis. The dude is he's a dog. He's the ultimate dog mentality type of player. He's got that Davion Mitchell tenacity to him. He's got a long wingspan for his height. He's listed at like a 6'1", I think. Some places he's listed at 6'3". I don't believe that at all. I think he's probably more 6'1" with a big wingspan. I mean, he's a guy that can score at all three levels. He can shoot from deep, really from anywhere. And then he also showed the ability to get inside the three-point line and be able to score around bigger defenders, which is a big plus for a guy at his size. I would say the one thing holding him back is his size, just because of where the Kings are at. I think Boogie Ellis really can become an NBA player. From what we saw in this summer league, the way he gets after it defensively, and then he's a very good offensive player, I just don't think that's with the Kings, because all of our two ways are already filled up. And then with that last roster spot, I think you're looking at a bigger player. And so I feel like he's going to go and find his way into a two-way spot or a roster spot somewhere else. But if that doesn't happen, I mean, he's going to be a great guy on Stockton, hopefully. And then if we ever, if things change on the Kings roster, I could see him getting a chance. It'll be very interesting to see what the Kings do with that final roster spot, to see who else maybe the Kings bring into training camp to compete for that spot. I do think we're going to see a veteran get that spot, rather than a more inexperienced player like a Terry Taylor or a Nassir Little, even though Nassir's been in the league for a little bit now, but he's not a proven player. And I thought the Kings would bring in a more proven wing last season, and they didn't. And so That's why I think I would like a guy like Jay Crowder, even though I don't even know if he would crack the rotation just because he has not been good lately, but he can still shoot the three some. He made 25 starts for the Bucks last season, but that's really more of an indictment on the Bucks and their situation with how old their entire team is and how they were just desperate for anyone. But it's true that he's not that far away from being a really important piece on those Phoenix teams and that Phoenix team that went to the finals, and also being on the Heat team that went to the finals. So I just think like maybe we can squeeze one last solid season out of him where he can contribute to a very obvious hole in the Kings roster right now. Anyways, that is it for this episode of the Rule Report. Let me know who you want to see get that final roster spot for the Kings, what you think of all these guys at the end of the Kings bench and the guys that the Kings are bringing in for workouts and training camp. If there is any Kings news, I will be right back here, and I will also be making that last player preview about Devin Carter. And then we're getting pretty close to the preseason starting up here, and then the season's going to start. So I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.